Well, hello everybody. This is Daniel with Daniel's Bullion Coins. I have my sweet wife Ingrid here
Good
today.
morning.
Good morning. We're going to take some questions and talk about gold and silver today.
Okay, I guess we first start off always with how was it at the shop this week? What did we see?
Sure. It's getting quieter. It was quiet last week.
Yeah.
It's getting quieter this week. We had bars at $30, last bars and rounds at $30, and this week we're going to do 90% at spot, mainly the quarters. So come in, see what we've got, make you a deal on the dimes also. We're a big believer in the 90%.
Yeah.
We'd love to give you my spiel. If you come in, I'll tell you why I think dimes, quarters, and halves are a good place to be, especially when you can get it at spot. You get the incremental, fungible authenticity of 90%.
That's right. That's a really good deal. Okay, I guess my first question, because there's been so much happening. I mean,
wow.
where do we start? But
where would you start?
I know. Well, I'm going to ask you about Howard Lutnick.
Yes.
We learned some things this week.
Yes,
They're
I've
amazing.
always been fascinated with Howard Lutnick. Cantor Fitzgerald, he's in charge of that. And Cantor Fitzgerald was a company that was in the World Trade Centers when 9/11 happened. And nearly 700 of his employees were lost. He survived because he was dropping his child off at first day of kindergarten.
Yeah.
And he lost his brother Gary in that. But Howard Lutnick is a big proponent of tariffs. He understands that. He pretty much brought Cantor Fitzgerald back from the ashes and built it into he's a billionaire, maybe even $1.5 billion. And yet here he is willing to take a huge pay cut.
Secretary of Commerce.
Become Secretary of Commerce, yes, and work for Trump and bring the tariff idea to the Trump administration. Well, Trump added to Trump. Trump's always talked about it.
He's always talked about it.
So the two of them agree, and they're tackling this tariff thing. And we're going to go into Nixon and Roosevelt in just a minute, because. But I want to tell you about Lutnick. He turned over 25% of the company to the people that were lost, to the survivors, to the survivors, and gave them a percentage of the dividend and things. It was huge, astronomical. Amazing that the company was even able to pick up and go again when he gave so much of it away and did so much for other people. So he's got the hugest smile in the world, you know, and he just is, the character is just so real in him. So that's just Howard Lutnick, and that's going to be something laying the foundation work for what Trump is trying to do.
Yes. So let's compare that to Roosevelt and Nixon. What they kind of
okay. So Howard Lutnick and Trump. I'm trying to put it together and piece it together in my mind, and we've got Steve Bassett out in Switzerland talking to the Chinese this weekend, even today, probably talking right now. So if you have a chance, try to follow that. But what I think they're getting ready to do is what Roosevelt did and what Nixon did. Now, Roosevelt changed the value of gold from, I think it was 20-some dollars to 30-some dollars. He doubled it. And he created, with the newfound wealth that he had created by statutorily changing the value of gold, he started what was known as the Exchange Stabilization Fund, and he started all the new deals. You know, the works programs, all the social welfare, all these different things. And that satisfied the people, because what he had done is he had made the rich richer and the poor poorer.
Yeah.
And he made the amount of work that you have to do per hour, he increased that.
He did that by the gold.
By taking the gold and revaluing it, he increased the labor that you have to do to get dollars.
Yeah.
So it started us on the path of devaluing the dollar. We were already on the path of devaluing the dollar, but it intensified. Each time we intensified the situation by different things that we were doing. So Roosevelt did it. The Exchange Stabilization Fund went in and manipulated the market. You know, and later on, Reagan changed the name of it to the Plunge Protection Group, and eventually they ended up with their own seat on the stock market to move and adjust things and make profit off of it. So they've been adding to their coffers all the way along. So then the Nixon came along, and he wanted to take the statutory amount and increase it so that he could have a budget, because he was dealing with Pol Pot
Yeah.
and Mao Zedong.
Yeah.
And, we became that imperialistic United States,
Yeah.
which we're all not a fan of now, going out into all these other countries and
Right.
imposing our
Yeah.
systems. And it's a good system and all, but hey, let them do their own thing. And the corruption just starts to get
corruption.
snowballed. So
Yes.
that's why we have the Howard Lutnick Trump situation where they're trying to bring us back to nationalism.
Yeah.
And the press poo-poos that word and turns it into a communist word, but it's about us coming back to the U.S. and centralizing and being concerned about us.
Yes.
And at the time, it was a good thing. Nixon took us off the silver standard.
Silver
so we were kind of, it's a stretch, but I call it the gold standard Roosevelt, and silver standard was Nixon. And Kissinger, of course, came in with the petrodollar. But the money that Nixon got a hold of was to stop the millions and millions of people that Pol Pot
they were just
they
killing
were
off.
killing. So it was a good thing. And then to satisfy the people that their labor was increasing, and you see how we became a two-family dual income.
Right. Just to make it.
Right, in order to make it, because you doubled the amount of work that the lower class had to produce, because the upper class got a double increase in gold.
Yeah.
Guess where I'm heading? Whoever's holding gold is going to double. Well, that's okay. We'll talk about that later. So the lower class, the ones who didn't have the gold and silver, they had to double the amount of hours that they worked. So the wives went out to work. So we had the breakdown of the family and all this type of thing. Well, he wanted to quiet the people, and at that time in the 70s, they were really big on the environment. That's what people were screaming about, and
Greenpeace.
So yes, Greenpeace,
Save the
OSHA, all of that.
whales.
So he gave them a bone to keep them quiet, the lower class, uneducated people, so that he could take the money and increase the military and do what needed to be really done.
The working class. I
The working class.
Lower class. But
I'm
the
sorry.
working
I
class.
shouldn't say
The people,
lower class.
the
Lower income is what I meant to
normies
say.
like us.
You're like us.
We work.
We're working class.
Yes.
Lower
We're actually
income is what I meant to
producers,
say.
the actual ones.
Right, the actual people working, and they're working their way up. You're young and you go into the workforce and you produce, and later on in life you have that where you can now buy the gold and silver. Well, hey, start buying the gold and silver now and the copper and putting it back, and getting yourself into position so when they statutorily adjust the price of gold again.
Yeah.
Now, in order to statutorily increase it, you only go to 3,000 because you have to stay inside the laws, the statutes, and the laws.
So it's set by spots.
Right, it's set by the market and all of that. Now, of course, the gold may be 45 or 5,000 by the time we get to that point where they reestablish it.
Right.
But you see, now Trump is going to take the windfall money that he's going to get from readjusting
from $42.22.
Right, from $42.22 to $3,000.
Yeah.
That's like $1 trillion.
Oh my gosh,
And so they've already said, well, we've got this sovereign wealth fund. Let's put it in there, and then we can be producing a Cantor Fitzgerald type of income, where instead of being totally consuming cash, the government can actually produce cash. And we need to do that because our entitlements and our debt are over $200 trillion. We can never mathematically pay back Social Security and all these unfunded liabilities, these pensions and everything, unless we come up with the government producing an income.
Right.
So the executive branch can do that alone in itself. There's judicial precedent and executive order precedent with Roosevelt and Nixon.
Yeah.
That's how come Trump keeps talking about Roosevelt, because Roosevelt had 3 or 4 terms.
Yes.
Right, did he not complete his 4th term?
I know he had 3.
I forget. My mind's drawing a
terrible.
blank.
Sorry,
That's fine.
y'all.
But the point still goes that he's
more
got
than
that
2.
executive precedent that he can do this. And the Treasury and the Fed, of course, they pass it off back and forth to each other.
Right.
But the Treasury would then have that money to go into, and then we can bring our assets in, our land, our lumber, our minerals, the Ukraine minerals that we
Right.
signed. All of that stuff comes into a profit-making company, which produces a dividend, which
Yeah.
the Cantor Fitzgerald has already done. He turned a company from the ashes, lost 700 people, lost his brother, and turned it from that into a multi-billion-dollar company where he's worth $1.5 billion. So he's just doing the same thing again,
Right.
but on a much larger scale, adding 3 or 4 zeros to the end of it, and bringing us back to nationalism, bringing us back to U.S.
And making the treasuries, that's kind of my next question, because there's been so few buyers. So he's making bringing the money back into the treasury so maybe people would buy, invest.
Right.
Is that it?
So yes, it's kind of two things there. They're bringing everybody back to buy and invest. That's going to be the new currency.
Right.
Okay. But we're also at the same time, we're losing buyers of the worthless currency that mathematically there's no way to solve the problem.
Right.
The reserve currency dollar's in trouble. And so I'm thinking they're going to have to create a whole new currency, like a citizen's currency, and maybe possibly it's going to include Canada and Mexico. I don't know, but what's happening is the reserve currency dollar that we're all familiar with now, the fiat currency, is fading away as the Eastern Bloc is starting to unify around the yuan, around the yuan,
Chinese yuan.
and it's starting to rise as a reserve currency. Everyone was like 20 or 30 years. No, it's happening pretty fast. The Eastern Bloc is coming together. So, and that's good, two reserve currencies is fine, because eventually we may, I don't know, are we going to inflate away the debt? Or are we going to cancel the debt? I don't know. One way or another, it's not going to work. We're going to have to come back to our roots, come up with a new currency, and start over again.
Yeah.
So what happens to the dollar? Do all those bonds fail? All those derivatives?
Oh,
maybe.
my gosh.
Maybe that's kind of what I think. They just fail.
Oh.
But we come back to our roots and we start over again.
Yeah.
We re-revolutionize the currency. It's going to be a huge change. But the thing about it is, there's so much backlog and backbiting and turmoil in the three tiers of government. We look at Congress and in its ineptitude, and then we look at the justices, and they're kind of really shady. So, but we need the executive branch,
Not
which
all of them,
controls
but
the currency. So he can do this
Right.
without the other branches. Let them fuss and fight among themselves. He has total control of this.
Yes. Wow.
And Howard Lutnick has the experience, who's done it before.
Yeah. Wow, honey, that's amazing.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Information.
But it's a package deal. It's Howard Lutnick and what he has done, what he's been through, and where he's headed and what he can do. He's just taking what he's done before and he's doing it again. And then he's taking the executive branch, who has the judicial rights and powers to do this.
Do you think that the next currency, the sovereign wealth,
The new currency, I call it a citizen's
do you
currency.
think it'll be a crypto?
Yes, we already are seeing. We're already seeing
Yeah.
this week the mandatory digital ID that you have to have in order to fly.
Yeah.
And the lines at DMV are really long. Everyone trying to get their digital ID.
Yeah.
And so we're headed in that direction. Where and I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a collapse in the dollar, a major downturn in the dollar. And Trump and Steve have already talked about having $5,000 ready to go out, because each time that the dollar starts to collapse, you need more and more money. I believe it was Bush sent out $1,200. Well, now it's going to be $5,000 this time. So you see that they're having trouble with the currency. As I was saying, the Eastern Bloc and Germany and Canada, they're slowing down on their purchases of our treasuries.
Oh, yeah, they're not
and so
buying.
now the treasuries is starting to climb, and we're getting into a thing called not QE.
Yeah,
And that's where the
explain
Fed
that.
is having to purchase. They're having this auction, and it's getting close to 5%. And Steve Bassett is like, hey, quick, jump in there. You've got the desk, which is the plunge protection desk, which is the old Roosevelt thing. Jump in there and buy these treasuries and bail us out. We need some more time to get this project together.
Oh, my
But
goodness.
then you've got the interest,
Yeah.
that we're paying on that. So keep the interest down, but the interest is climbing. Fewer and fewer people are buying it. And eventually the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which became the
Protection.
Plunge Protection Group, they're going to eventually run out of money because you just can't keep buying and paying the
Yeah.
interest and buying. It's like buying a credit, having 5 or 6 credit
Yeah.
cards that are maxed out, and you get another credit card and you roll them
Oh,
into
my
that, and the
goodness.
interest
Yeah.
rate is higher because
Yeah.
your credit's getting lower and
So
lower.
it's just
Well, that's exactly where the
yeah.
government is. Their credit
buying
score
their
is getting
own.
lower and lower. They're getting all of their credit cards maxed out. And
Yeah.
They're getting another credit card, and eventually that's going to end.
That's gonna
and that's
end.
the not QE, that the quantitative easing. No, we're not stepping in the market, but they really are. They really are.
Wow, honey.
Especially this week, they've done that, a lot of that.
I'm just amazed how you can wrap your head around all this stuff.
Well, I probably really am just like a surface, 60,000 foot view of it. And I kind of put a lot of my opinions and thoughts into it. So this is not financial advice. It's just
Right.
my crazy mind trying to figure out what we're going to do.
Your brilliant
Because it's an
mind.
impossible situation, mathematically impossible to solve.
Yeah.
The only thing to do is to wash our hands of it or inflate it away. It's
Inflate
really-
it away while he's making another currency, building another.
Right, right.
Basically.
Yeah. And you can always inflate the currency up, and add zeros to it. And then when you reset, just take off the zeros.
Ooh.
So, but that really affects, low income people, the average American.
Right.
Now, you can be outside the average American in 2 ways. One is to have your own skill. Let's go back to that in a minute.
let's do that. Yeah.
And then you can have the gold and silver.
Yeah.
You can be outside of the system and be prepared. So, and
Yeah.
you can have your regular job and have something going on the side.
Right.
And I've used the chainsaw thing a couple of times. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on that. You can buy a chainsaw, you can cut and split firewood, and eventually you buy yourself a log splitter,
Yeah.
and you're selling firewood, and then eventually you buy yourself a sawmill, and you can cut and sell lumber,
Yeah.
which is something that is a specialty on this side of the economy, but may be a unique thing on the other side of the economy.
Yeah.
If you can cut and sell it cheaper than the professional sawmills.
Right.
And then eventually you can go into things like chippers. Get yourself a chipper and get mulch. And I remembered when I used to be in the construction business, the most valuable compost
Yeah.
fertilizer that we could get was the porta john and the chipper wood mixed together. And I would put it underneath the yard in the lawn, and I had the
my
best
goodness.
lawns in the whole neighborhood from
Oh,
that.
my
It is. And
believe
historically, it is the best
Yeah.
compost in the world. And if there's a life and death breakdown Mad Max situation,
Yeah.
you'd be there with compost that would compare to nothing.
As to
And
grow
people
your
would look the other way on
food.
what it is if their life depended on it. They would use it
To grow crops.
to grow crops.
grow-
To go from the green
Yeah, the
lawn
green
to
lawn.
right. See how you can just switch. You can do something in both economies.
Yeah.
So that's what I meant by the chainsaw. I'll go back to the
Yeah.
chainsaw, but I mean to grow. Just like we grew this business.
Yeah.
We started out with a case
Yeah.
probably about the size
Right.
of this case right here, paid $75 a week, a month for
Yeah.
our rent, and I put a few coins in there, and I sat on the
Yeah.
staircase next to the display case, and if someone came in, I just talked coins with them.
Yeah.
And
An
I
economy.
learned as I was growing the business, because I basically didn't know much when I started it, but I knew gold and silver was the way to go.
Yeah.
And the key is to start out small and be
Don't just buy a
ready
small beginning.
to go
Yeah.
with new and bigger things, and
Right.
expand and add to it. Try different things. Some things don't work, and you try back and give up on that and try go a different way and
Right.
find out what works. Both sides of the economy.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
That's a lot of information
That's a
today.
lot.
Any other questions for today?
I don't think we could top on any of that.
Yeah,
Oops, I
that's
just
a
dropped
lot
my
right
pen.
there. Well, we look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Yes.
Bless you.
Blessings, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.